Syrian President Bashar al-Assad says he isn't going anywhere. 19 months into an insurgency against him, the country is consumed by violence. Smoke pours out of the Great Mosque in Douma as rebels fight for control of Aleppo. In a rare television interview, Assad nixed any plan to end the conflict that would involve him leaving.
I'm not puppet. I wasn't made by the West to go to the West or to any other country. I'm Syrian. I'm made in Syria, and I have to live in Syria and die in Syria.
He also had this warning for the West about intervening.
I think the price of this invasion, if it's happened, is going too big, more than the whole world can afford.
Assad's defiant remarks coincided with explosions throughout the country. In this latest video posted to a social media website, whose content Reuters cannot independently verify.
Turkish politician has strongly criticized Ankara's interference in Syria's internal affairs. In an exclusive interview with Press TV's headquarters in Tehran, Turkey's former culture minister, Namık Kemal Zeybak, says Ankara's support for the insurgents fighting the Syrian government does not serve his country's interests. Zeybak says some 90% of the Turkish people are totally opposed to the government's policies in Syria. He says both supporters and opponents of the ruling AK party oppose meddling in Syria's internal affairs.
Onlar için de yani oturup konuşan ne işin var senin Suriye'de?
What business do you have in Syria, Mr. Recep Tayyip Erdogan? What business do you have in Syria, Mr. Ahmed Davutoğlu? The Syrian issue is none of our business. When someone has a fight in his home, it's not other people's business. This is what logic dictates. What interests does Turkey have in Syria?
The former Turkish culture minister says those fighting the Syrian government include terrorists, al-Qaeda members, and mercenaries. He also says the Syrian conflict and Turkey's interference in the issue will only serve Washington's interests.
Hello everyone, welcome to GGN. Today is Thursday, November 8th, 2012, and I'm Darko. So we just saw two videos. The first one was Assad says he's not a puppet of the West. And this comes after, I just covered this article here, this UK Prime Minister Cameron saying safe passage for Assad could be arranged. So they were offering him, I guess, one last chance. And he took that message pretty serious. You know, that's what I was talking about yesterday, about how right after the elections they're escalating this regime change per policy, per Brookings Institute policy, not democracy, not your governments, not your voters, but private think tanks plan this whole thing down to the T. So that's what they're doing. They're following a script. And Assad knows this, and that's why it came out right away. He doesn't make many appearances, and he answered them, gave them their answer. He's not a Western puppet. And I love the footage that they were showing about as explosions were rocked. Well, those are terrorists and mercenaries that the West, like Cameron, are supplying. And you know, you've seen those people running across the street. Well, those were civilians. So I mean, they're killing civilians too. So this other video here says Turkey serving West in Syria in return for EU membership. That's right, they want EU membership, so they're doing anything that they can. A political analyst says Turkey is working hard to impress the West with its anti-Syria stance in order to gain the EU membership. So this director of Middle East Studies in Beirut said Turkey made a great mistake 20 months ago when it closed the gate, which was opened by Syria to Turkey and the Arab world and to the east. And Turkey made that move in order to open the western gate and to be a member of the European Union. Next up, we have British Prime Minister meets with Saudi King after UAE defense deal. So the Prime Minister Cameron met with the Saudi King and other top Saudi officials on Tuesday following a two-day visit to the UAE where he secured a defense partnership with the Gulf state. Probably, you know, at the head of the plan and the Qatar plan. This is just after what? He was visiting refugees. He was holding talks with the terrorists in Syria. He was determined to give Syria a brighter future. Yeah, Putin calls it bomb democracy, which is countries that are not very democratic at all, telling other sovereign nations to form a democracy. And if they don't, they'll bomb them. It says here, video shows another insurgent execution in Syria. Recently released video footage has shown that insurgents are executing another captured Syrian, raising further concern about the insurgent brutality. The shocking footage shows a captured Syrian man pleading for his life. As insurgent gunfire is heard blasting for some seconds, the man then falls on the ground before an insurgent shoots another bullet at him. And remember this article I covered, Syria rebels bring fight to pro-Assad Palestinians. This was from October 31st, Halloween. Syrian rebels said on Wednesday that they had formed a brigade of sympathetic Palestinians in a Damascus district to fight armed Palestinians aligned with Assad. They say, we've been arming Palestinians who are willing to fight. We have formed a storm brigade, which is made up of Palestinian fighters only. And this is what I was talking about, Golan Heights, about how that's starting to heat up now. So then Israel can, do what Israel does, which is always under the attack and always basically going on the preemptive attack. So they did bring the fight to pro-Assad Palestinians. It says rebel factions killed 10 pro-Assad Palestinians in refugee camps. Slain were members of Popular Front faction. So the rebel terrorists have killed 10 members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine today in the refugee camp in Damascus, the latest in the growing effort to contest control over the camp from the pro-Assad leadership. The Free Syrian Army has been determined to pump weapons into the camp in an attempt to spark a rebellion among pro-rebel Palestinians. The Assad government insists that it stands firmly with the Palestinians, i.e., he's not a Zionist puppet. That's what he's trying to say. Syria is a pretty significant situation, unlike Libya. It's right on the doorstep of Israel. So once that happens, then everything else can spark off, especially when with Iran. Syrian forces raid Hamas offices in Damascus. So Hamas officials fear for supporters in refugee camps as the government stormed the offices of the two top Hamas officials. They've also raided an apartment of Hamas political chief who's already fled the country. So they left nearly a year ago, Hamas leaders that is, but left security to guard the offices and retain considerable support in Syria's refugee camps, post-regime change probably. The raids reflect a breakdown in relations between Hamas and their former patrons of the Assad regime. So the Syrian government termed Hamas ungrateful and traitorous. Next up, 13 killed, 39 wounded in Iraq. This is significant. Turkish troops enter the north, so at least 13 people were killed, 39 more were wounded across Iraq today. So it says some of the casualties occurred during Turkish operations in northern Iraq. Turkish troops briefly entered northern Iraq today to conduct an operation against Kurdish rebels. The Turkish media reported maneuvers but gave no details. This is significant because although airstrikes are common, ground troops rarely cross the border. Vandals cut down Palestinians' olive trees in suspected settler attack. The graffiti at the site includes phrases price tag. So 50 trees were cut down last night in an olive grove belonging to residents of the Palestine village. Last Sunday, 3 cars were vandalized in the refugee camp near Jerusalem. The anonymous vandals spray-painted phrases across the car's windows, including price tag, death to the enemy, and liberty to the homeland. And this isn't the first case that they were cutting down olive trees as well. I covered up that before. Palestinian teenager killed by Israeli air raid on Gaza. It says that the spokesman for Hamas Health Ministry said on Thursday that an Israeli helicopter fired several bullets at a 13-year-old victim. On Monday, a Palestinian man suffered psychiatric problems, was killed by Israeli troops after he approached Gaza's border fence. The 20-year-old man that was injured on Sunday evening was basically left as the Israeli army refused to allow Palestinian ambulances to the scene to transport him. Next up, Israel out to destabilize states recognizing Palestine, says a Sudanese envoy. So the ambassador to the UK says Israel's recent attack on the Sudanese weapon factory is not the first time Tel Aviv has tried to destabilize the country over its support of the Palestinian cause. So like Syria's Assad, either you're with Israel or you're against them. Sudan calls Israel. That's why it's hard for me to believe this whole thing with Obama. There may be some truth to it as far as Obama not being as pro-Israel. But you know, there were some fresh videos from 108 Morris 108. Go check them out about the Sheikh Hussein, and you know, he said what I had just said. What was it, yesterday or the day before? Which is, you know, yeah, Obama may not necessarily be as big of a big war type president or candidate like Romney would have been. You know, a hot war. He's more covert, special ops. You know, kind of like how Kennedy was supposedly. And that's the thing. I mentioned Kennedy. I was like, without naming him, I was like, well, you know, Obama wouldn't be there unless Israel and the Zionists and the powers that be wanted him to be there. So if he doesn't do what he's supposed to do, you know, his head is going to get blown off in front of, you know, live television to let anybody know that replaces him, you know, to basically, you better do what we tell you to do. So we'll see what happens. That's why I find it's hard that, you know, he's going to be in between. You know, it's either you're with them or you're against them. Sudan calls Israel its #1 enemy. It says Sudan's president has called Israel the country's #1 enemy and repeated the assertion that Tel Aviv carried out an October airstrike on its arms factory in Sudanese capital. Very interesting. Right after the election, Obama writing book with Elie Wiesel, Holocaust survivor, says it will be a book of two friends. So he now that he's reelected, he might have a little more time for another big project, writing a book with the Holocaust survival and Nobel Peace Prize laureate. So Obama's a Nobel Peace Prize recipient as well. So he first met Wiesel '84 when they lectured at his college. They became friends in 2009 while visiting Buchenwald together. Now occasionally have dinner together. Actually, I saw Obama back in 2004 before anyone even heard of him. When I was in my first year of college. I thought that was interesting, and of course I couldn't go to see him. It was really weird. The students couldn't actually, they were hand selected, there was very few, and most of them had to watch it on the university network. Putin vows Russia will never forget Holocaust. So again, you know, like, what the hell's going on here? So everybody's, you know, counting down to Israel right after the elections. It's interesting that that Putin would say this. But he goes on and he says that we will never forget the losses that the Jewish people suffered in fighting Nazism, nor will we ever forget the Holocaust, which is, you know, because it was, you know, one of the biggest contributors towards Nazi Germany were Zionists, basically to create their own state. So, and people find it hard that there was not just Jews inside in Germany at the time that weren't in camps, but there was actually Jews that were Nazis. And as the United States was basically aiding communists and Bolsheviks, you know, and the Nazis were the only ones that were supposedly fighting this. What happened? All of these people were supposedly killed. Well, in Russia, what about the 20 to 60 million Christians that were killed under communism in Russia, which was invented by the Jews? What about all the Jewish guys like Lenin, who killed the Christian Tsar and his baby children? This is from RT, the comment board. Ordinary Russians will never forget the 10 to 12 million white Russians killed by the Judeo-Bolsheviks. So, Iran, Armenia start building joint hydroelectric power plant. This is awesome when I saw this this article. Hydroelectric power plant. So they're just getting around these sanctions the best they can, and it's with what I just covered yesterday, Armenia. So it's interesting, though, because Iran, a lot of people don't know, is like Syria. It's fairly moderate. You know, the West think that they're just like this crazy Islamic state. And the middle upper class there in Iran, they're not exactly on board with Ahmadinejad, who kind of caters to the poor, which is less moderate, more conservative. But what they're doing, these sanctions, is they're actually stoking anti-U.S. sentiment. I don't know if this is the powers that be's plan to create an enemy, but Netanyahu sought to provoke Iran war and drag in the United States in 2010. Says the truth is that Netanyahu and Barak did not order the military to plan a direct all-out attack on Iran. Their true intention was to trigger a chain of events which would create tension and provoke Iran, and eventually could have led to a war that might drag in the United States. So this is like every other false flag, right? Like with Japan, the Pearl Harbor, whether it was Gulf of Tonkin. It says here, Iranian jets fire on U.S. drones. So they're making a big deal out of the Iranians actually carrying out exercises in their border, and you know, God forbid if they do that. You know, the only one that can have nuclear weapons is everybody but the West enemies, and nobody else can hold exercises like the U.S. and Israel do on a daily basis globally, except for them. Our aircraft was never in Iranian airspace. They were spying. Imagine if an Iranian drone was flying over U.S. Thank you.